Wednesday, July the 8th, the year 2020. We're going to continue reading a book titled They Got Their Man, A Story of Income Tax Persecution by Elmer Lynn Williams. I should say that Gordon Call's book, one of the many books that was written about Gordon Call, was titled There Was a Man. So There Was a Man versus They Got Their Man. I wonder if Gordon Call and Elmer Lynn Williams knew each other. Also, I did receive an email this morning from somebody who makes it his business to know about taxes. He wrote, sent you some clips about him referring to Elmer Lynn Williams. It appears that he was prominent as a speaker for a few years around 1920. He died in 1947. Hope all is well with you. So I haven't seen those clips yet. If I find them, I looked all over, but if I find them, I will try to post them so we can learn about Mr. Elmer Lynn Williams as much as possible. I do believe in the saying, if you don't learn from history, you're doomed to repeat it. So anyway, one other thing I want to say before I get to reading page 21, it really resonated with me. I think I read it in a book title. It said, if they don't believe you, they won't hear you. In other words, the reason they don't hear you is because they don't believe you. So anyway, here we go. I'm going to start at the bottom of page 20 and we'll continue to page 40. February the 7th, 1899, the trial of Zola began. The jury is composed of small tradespeople. The complacent judge suppresses the real issue, rules out testimony favorable to Zola with the declaration, the question will not be put, which is similar to what we complain about today, withholding exculpatory evidence. At last, Zola speaks in his own defense. I quote only his closing sentences. All seem to be against me, the two chambers, the civil powers, the military powers, the great newspapers, the public opinion, which they have poisoned. And I have nothing for me but the ideal of truth and justice. I am calm, I shall conquer. I desired that my country take no longer the way of deception and injustice. I may be sentenced here. Some day France will thank me for having helped to save her honor. All were against Emile Zola. The jury filed in. Zola guilty. 1 year imprisonment, a fine of 3,000 francs. On compulsion of friends, Zola fled to England July the 18th, 1899, where he awaited news from his friends Clement Q, Leberai, and others. On August the 31st, the news arrived. Prepare yourself for a great success. 1 hour later, the morning papers contained the news of Lieutenant Colonel Henry's confession of forgery and suicide the night before. In Paris, Esther Hazy, the real traitor, and one of his mistresses were in prison. The chief of the general staff resigned. Other generals resigned. Dreyfus was proven innocent. Zola, who had so fearlessly defended him, was now vindicated. It is October the 5th, 1902. A great throng assembles to do homage to the dead Emile Zola. When others had spoken, a man of short stature with perfectly white hair rose to speak. He had once been an implacable enemy of Zola. It was Anatole France. He spoke as only he could speak. We must pronounce over a beer, B-I-E-R, only grave and serene words, and make gestures only of peace and harmony. But you know, gentlemen, there is no peace anywhere save in justice, no repose save in truth. I do not speak of that metaphysical truth over which the philosophers will eternally dispute. I speak of that moral truth, which we can seize because it is relative, sensitive, in conformity with our nature, and so near us that a child can touch it with his hand. I shall not betray the justice which bids me to praise that which is praiseworthy. I shall not hide the truth in a cowardly silence. And why remain silent? Do they, his calumniators, remain silent? I shall only say that which must be said over his tomb, and I shall say all that must be said. A review of the Dreyfus affair follows picturing Zola's public action, his struggles, trials, exile, and sufferings, as well as the social consequences of his act. Gentlemen, there is only one country in the world in which this great thing could be accomplished. How admirable is the genius of our country! How beautiful is the soul of France, which centuries past has taught right and justice to Europe and to the world. France is again the land of ornate reason and benevolent thought, the soil of equitable magistrature, the country of Turgot, of Montesquieu, of Voltaire, of Malesherbes. Zola has merited well of his country in not despairing of justice in France. Let us not sorrow for him because he endured and suffered. Let us envy him. Envy him. He has honored his country and the world through an immense work and through a great action. Envy him his destiny and his heart, which made his lot that of the greatest. He was a moment of the conscience of mankind. Immediately after the conviction of Malone, I published an article in the magazine Lightning, Volume 2, Number 9, pointing out that his conviction was as gross miscarriage of justice as that of Dreyfus. My determination to search for the cause of Malone's persecution and document the facts has resulted in this memorial. Then there's an anonymous poem. To sin by silence when we should protest makes cowards of men. The human race has climbed on protest, had no voice been raised against. Injustice, ignorance, and lust. The Inquisition yet would serve the law, and guillotines decide our last disputes. The few who dare must speak, and speak again to right the wrongs of many. And then on page 24 is a painting or maybe an old photograph of Miss William H. Malone. Miss Malone, upon her return from Germany, was seized by our federal agents, stripped and searched without warrant or cause in a typical Gestapo fashion. The homecoming. Breathes there the man with soul so dead, who never to himself hath said, This is my own, my native land, whose heart hath never within him burned, as home his footsteps he hath turned, from wandering a foreign strand. Written by Scott. December the 23rd, 1936, the transatlantic steamer Europa was coming into port at New York. The Christmas spirit was in the air. Shipboard friends, new and old, were exchanging cards and saying farewells. Eager eyes were turned upon Bedloe's Island, where liberty lights the world with her unfailing torch. Returning citizens felt a new security as they came fresh from the political ferment and intrigue of the old world. Home seemed doubly near after months abroad. Then, above with the laughter and joyous farewells, a man shouted, William H. Malone, you are under arrest. What happened then is best told by the victim himself. My wife and I were taken to our cabin where I was forced to undress and was subjected to a search of all my personal effects in a ruthless manner, a search that lasted over 2 hours. Miss Malone was also stripped and searched. I had protested to the officers that I was returning home of my own free will and accord to face the charges made against me, that my bond, which guaranteed my return to Chicago, had been accepted by the government. I asked if I could not, under the circumstances, go with my wife to a hotel for the evening, which request was refused. The weather was quite cold, and the ship did not dock until about 11 o'clock at night. It was 2 o'clock or thereabouts in the morning when I was carried off to jail, where I was again stripped and thrown into a cell with 8 or 10 other men. In the morning, I was brought before a commissioner and promptly released because, as I stated, my bond had been posted and accepted before my arrival in New York, of which fact the federal agent who seized us was fully aware. The question naturally arises, why should a citizen of the United States who had borne a reputation beyond reproach, who had lived a lifetime in one community, who had occupied offices of public trust for a quarter of a century, whose bond had been accepted and filed, be subjected to the humiliation of being stripped and searched? Why should such abuse be inflicted upon his wife, particularly when the charge was merely one of a dispute between the government and the citizens as to the amount of taxes he owed? Malone's Park Ridge speech, February 1937. Japanese soldiers in China have recently shocked civilization by compelling men from other lands to undress in public in order to humiliate them. In America, people suspected of carrying concealed weapons are sometimes searched, but courts have frequently discharged even notorious criminals because they were searched without a warrant, though contraband articles were found upon them. What lethal weapon was William H. Malone suspected of having concealed? What was his modest wife suspected of having concealed about her person? These two Americans had gone to Germany on urgent business and were returning to their home, where they enjoy the respect and affection of all those who knew them best. Chapter 2, Looking Back. Let us look back a few years in order to see what preceded the indictment and arrest of William H. Malone, so that the motives may be understood. For base motives often inspire prosecutions, even in our present advanced civilization. His history as a public official is a record of fearless opposition to selfish vested interest and political tax racketeers as a citizen. It is a record of courage, kindness, and unselfish devotion to the cause of humanity. In 1911, Malone was elected mayor of the city of Park Ridge, Illinois, where he has resided since 1906. As a dealer in real estate and in building modern homes and business buildings, he made his home city one of Chicago's most attractive suburbs. In 1912, he was elected on the progressive ticket, headed by Theodore Roosevelt as a member of the Illinois Board of Equalization. The board was composed of 25 elected members. Its duties were to assess for tax purposes the value of the capital stock of all non-mercantile corporations and railway rights of way. While this board had no authority to assess real estate, it was charged with the duty of ordering local assessing boards to assess real estate over again if and when inequalities appeared in their assessment list. Malone was reelected in 1916 as a Republican on the same ticket with Frank O. Loden, who was elected governor. Malone continued to serve in that office until the elected board was abolished by the legislature at the behest of Governor Loden. A commission of 3 members to be appointed by the governor was then created. The abolition of the elected board and the creation of the appointed commission was the beginning of a fight unique in political history. Loden's successor as governor, after being installed in 1921, appointed Malone a member of the State Tax Commission with which Loden had created. He was reappointed in 1924 and was serving as chairman of the commission when on January the 5th, 1931, he sent in his letter of resignation and announced that he was a candidate for governor. Malone was chosen president of the Citizens State Bank of Park Ridge in 1929. His devotion to that position during the dark days of the Depression will never be forgotten. He gave everything but his soul to the bank, with the result that the depositors' money was protected 100%. During his long years of service as mayor, banker, member of the elected state tax board and appointed state tax commission, he won the confidence of homeowners and farmers of his state by his very courageous acts in their behalf. He waged a ceaseless fight against the tax dodging of the Pullman Company, the Chicago Street Car Lines, the People's Gas and Light and Coke Company of Chicago, and against tax racketeering politicians. These powerful enemies, in turn, waged a war against him. Lincoln Steffens once said, "Our political corruption is a system, a regularly established custom in the country, by which our political leaders are hired by bribery, by license to loot, and by quiet moral support to conduct the government of city, state, and nation, not for the common good, but for the special interest. The highway of corruption is the road to success." Chapter 11, The Pullman Company. Corporations cannot commit treason, nor be outlawed, nor excommunicate, for they have no souls. Coleridge. To comprehend the political vendetta which pursued William H. Malone for a quarter of a century, we must go back to 1985. John P. Altgeld, the governor of Illinois, sent a message to the Illinois State Tax Board, which put the spotlight on the Pullman Company's brazen methods of evading enormous sums of just taxes. Tax fixing by the Pullman Company. Governor Altgeld prepared a moral indictment of the Pullman Company with great care, including as evidence the sworn statements of George M. Pullman, its president. The following questions and answers were quoted by Altgeld from a suit in which George M. Pullman was the witness. Pullman's testimony. Are the dividends which you pay based on the whole capital of $36 million? Yes, sir, the whole capital of $36 million. Has the company any bonded debt? It has no bonded debt. And in addition to these dividends, you have accumulated from $16 million to $18 million of undivided profits? Answer. The undivided profits amount to something like $25 million. Question. In addition to these annual dividends you have mentioned, there has also been accumulated about $25 million? Answer. Yes, sir. Governor Altgeld asserted that the stock quotations at the time showed the stock alone was worth $61 million. The company's own report stated that the net earnings were $6,526,448. After paying the stockholders $2,520,000 in dividends in 1893, the company carried over $4,006,448 to the surplus, which then amounted to $25,700,000. Governor Altgeld said he had made inquiry of every state in the Union to ascertain the amount of taxes paid by the Pullman Company to other states, giving credit for all taxes paid by that corporation outside the home state, still left over $40 million of capital stock value to be taxed in Illinois. But what was the assessed value of the Pullman Company? It was $1,695,000. Summing up, Governor Altgeld said, It was apparent that the Pullman Company had for many years been annually defrauding the public, and that consequently it had then in its possession millions of dollars that in justice belonged to the small taxpayer. For certain, it is that when large, prosperous corporations such as the Pullman Company escape paying their share of taxes, the burden must be carried by those less able to pay. But my appeal was in vain, said the governor. The board left the assessment practically as it was. A score of years passed, then William H. Malone, as a member of the State Tax Board in 1916, recommended that the assessed value of the Pullman Company be increased to $33,802,284, a figure approximately that which Governor Altgeld had set as a fair assessed value. That was done. Okay, on the top of page 31, there is a black and white photograph of Governor John P. Altgeld with the text below it. Governor Altgeld, 1893 to 1897, tried in vain to compel the Pullman Company to pay its just share of capital stock taxes. He found that the company was paying on an assessed value of $1,695,000, but should have been assessed on a $40 million. William H. Malone in 1916 fixed the assessment at $33,854,341, which made him a target in the political vendetta described in this book. Page 32. Because of what followed, I am including the assessment of two other corporations whose valuations were increased through Malone's insistence. The Pullman Company increased from $16 million to $33.85 million. Chicago City Railways Company increased from $1.8 million to $6 million. People's Gas, Light, and Coke increased from $2 million to $14.8 million. Total for the three companies, $19.8 million to $54.75 million. His bold move to compel these corporations to pay their just share of taxes had far-reaching consequences. Frank O. Lowden, in addition to being governor of Illinois, was chairman of the board of the Pullman Company and son-in-law of George M. Pullman, its founder. The governor became so enraged at Malone's actions that he commanded the legislature to abolish the state tax board of 25 elected members and to create in its stead a state tax commission of 3 members, which he would appoint. Among the members of the legislature at that time was Michael L. Igo, later the U.S. District Attorney who prosecuted Malone. Igo proved his friendship for the Pullman Company and other utility corporations when he voted to oust the Malone-elected tax board and to create the new appointive board as demanded by Lowden. Lowden's appointees perform. The records show that the board appointed by Lowden immediately made huge reductions in the tax assessments of many corporations' assessments, which Malone had confirmed and strenuously fought to sustain. The reductions given the 3 corporations listed on the previous page were as follows. Pullman Company, $33.8 million under the Malone assessment went to $16 million under the Lowden appointed commission assessment. Reductions to these 3 corporations by the Lowden, so that would be a reduction of $17.8 million. People's Gas, Light, and Coke Company went from $14.85 million to $2 million under the Lowden appointed commission, a reduction of $12.8 million. Chicago Streetcar Lines under the Malone assessment was $6 million, went to $1.8 million under the Lowden appointed commission, which is a reduction of $4.2 million. Overall, a reduction of $34.9 million. Having seen the assessment he had made against the Pullman Company cut over $17 million and others shamefully reduced, Malone went on the warpath in behalf of the small taxpayers whose burdens had been heavily increased because of the actions of the Lowden appointees. He toured Illinois with large charts displaying the indefensible reductions made by the new board. Malone's dramatic campaign attracted nationwide attention and cost Frank O. Lowden the presidency of the United States. On page 34, there is a black and white photograph of, it looks like an upset man. He looks upset, and he's got an old-timey telephone in his ear where you hold the earpiece to your ear and you're talking in a telephone. Anyway, underneath it says, Governor Frank O. Lowden gets news of his defeat for the presidency. From 20 incredible years, W.M.H. Stewart. The top of page 35. Chapter 4, the South Dakota Campaign. South Dakota was the first state in the Union to hold a direct presidential primary for the purpose of electing delegates to the National Republican Convention to be held in June of 1920. The free spending of World War years and shortly thereafter, noted for the silk shirts worn by working men, extended through every phase of life, including politics. That presidential campaign was one of the most extravagant political spending sprees in our history. The major candidates had millions of dollars in their command. Frank O. Lowden, governor of Illinois, son-in-law of George M. Pullman and chairman of the board of directors of the Pullman Company, was one of the chief contenders. The other was Leonard Wood, a general of the U.S. Army, close personal friend of Theodore Roosevelt. While Lowden controlled great wealth, Wood's supporters likewise had unlimited funds to finance his campaign. Colonel William C. Proctor and the Ivory Soap King and other multimillionaires were backing General Wood. The friends of both Lowden and Wood were setting a furious pace, seeking delegates for the man of their choice. There was a government investigation into the unusual expenditures made in that primary election. Senator Kenyon's report to the United States Senate made in 1921 shows that General Wood managers admitted spending more than all of the 16 other candidates combined. It is common knowledge that political contests usually cost several times as much as the official reports made by the campaign managers with their tongues in their cheeks show. Lowden was widely publicized as the farmer candidate. The Republican farmers in South Dakota had enrolled to fight their fellow farmer. There seemed but little chance for Leonard Wood, the soldier, against such odds. Governor Loudoun claimed that he, being a farmer, would receive the farm vote if he were the party's candidate and thereby ensure a Republican victory. Here, then, was the first test in an agricultural state. If Loudoun succeeded in electing the delegates pledged to him, he would gain a great psychological advantage in other states in the Union. The Wood forces knew this to be true. They frankly admitted that if Loudoun were to defeat Wood in the first direct test, Wood sponsors might as well close their doors and go home. Malone's campaign in Illinois against Loudoun had attracted national interest. The Wood supporters concluded that Malone had the only real and direct issue which could stop Loudoun, provided he would be induced to go to the South Dakota and personally carry his issue to the people of that state. Malone, when approached, was reluctant to undertake this difficult task. He confided to Colonel Proctor his political ambition to become governor of Illinois, which he knew would be endangered by making Loudoun's record a national issue. For if Loudoun won under such circumstances and became president, Malone's political future would be doomed. Men with millions disliked defeat, and here success seemed so doubtful that Colonel Proctor made a proposition to Malone, which gamblers would call a long shot. If you will go to South Dakota with your facts and figures about Loudoun and the Pullman Company, and if you succeed in defeating the Loudoun delegates and elect all the delegates pledged to Wood, said Proctor, I'll make a political donation to finance your campaigns against the interest whose antagonisms you arouse, as well as for your own campaign for governor whenever you choose to run. However, you must elect all delegates for Wood or receive nothing. This was the sworn testimony of Malone, corroborated by other witnesses and contradicted by none. Colonel Proctor promised him that if he would go to South Dakota and succeed in defeating Loudoun, that he, Proctor, would in turn make a political donation to finance Malone in the sum of $500,000, so that Malone could make a forceful political campaign in Illinois. Proctor demanded but one pledge: absolute secrecy, both as to the source and the amount of the gift. Secrecy as to the source was demanded because if Wood were nominated, his campaign managers would then seek the support of those who had supported Loudoun in the primary, which they knew could not be had if it were known that Wood forces and had financed anti-Loudoun as well as pro-Wood campaigns. Malone had been advised by Proctor and by his attorney that a political gift received by an individual or by a political organization was not taxable income to the recipient. This was and still is the law. Malone, who was not holding public office at that time, accepted Colonel Proctor's proposition, and the rest is history. He waged a most aggressive fight in practically every county of South Dakota, acquainting the voters there with the fact that Loudoun, while governor, favored the Pullman Company and other powerful corporations at the expense of the farmer and the homeowner. Attorney Olaf E. Ray, a highly respected Chicago attorney, now 85 years of age, had already gone to the Dakotas for the General Wood Committee to work among the citizens of Scandinavian origin with whom he was at the top of page 38 is a black and white photo of Olaf E. Ray. Mr. Ray is a highly respected Chicago attorney, now 85 years of age. He wrote to Malone in 1920 from the presidential background in South Dakota, where Mr. Ray was campaigning for General Wood. Said Mr. Ray, someone from Loudoun's camp had told Governor Norbeck that you would be arrested here for what they could not tell. I told them that you, like every square, aggressive man, are to be hounded out of public life if the interest can do it. Governor Norbeck recognized his own self in that situation. He is a man after your own heart. Governor Norbeck said that when Loudoun declined your challenge to debate, he hurt himself greatly in South Dakota, February 23rd, 1920. So it goes on to say, citizens of Scandinavian origin with whom he was a popular leader. Mr. Ray also knew Governor Loudoun, having officed with him many years before. He believed that Malone and his issue offered the only chance for Wood to defeat Loudon. He urged Colonel Proctor to lend every effort to persuade Malone to carry his fight against Loudon into South Dakota. Let us now examine some of the 20-year-old documents of that campaign. Here is a telegram from Ray sent from Summit, South Dakota, and dated February 24th, 1920. William H. Malone, South LaSalle Street, Chicago. Loudon claims reduction on state, not general tax 20%. Wire me facts. Had thorough talk. Governor Norbeck, he wishes meeting you. Carpenter Hotel, Sioux Falls, Sioux Falls, 27th. Before speech, Dakota Tax Commission figures comparisons desirable. Wire King arranged Norbeck, appointed Illinois situation untouched, awaiting your arrival. Letter mailed you yesterday. Ray. That appeared to be some kind of wire telegram. Mr. Ray has often recited the facts, quoted now from his letter referred to in his telegram. It reads, Friend Malone, am assigned to duty hereabouts in the Scandinavian country. I had two and one half hour talk with Governor Peter Norbeck at Mitchell and told him all about your great fight. He listened and asked questions. He got entirely a new light from me and felt fine over it. I sent you a night telegram for fear this may not reach you. The top of page 40. Someone from Loudon's camp had told Governor Norbeck that you would be arrested here for what they could not tell. I told them that you, like every square, aggressive man, are to be hounded out of public life if the interest can do it. Governor Norbeck recognized his own self in that situation. Here is a man after your own heart. Governor Norbeck said that when Loudon declined your challenge to debate, he hurt himself greatly in South Dakota. Governor Norbeck would like to meet you in Sioux Falls and talk things over with you before you talk publicly. Governor Norbeck is running for United States Senator and has a cinch. So you see he will be playing a great part in the future of national matters. He is a big, fine fellow, full of pep and fight. You will have a fine friend in the governor, your friend, signed Ray. Malone offers to debate with Loudon. The first gun that Malone fired when he arrived in South Dakota was to repeat publicly his offer of $1,000 to charity if Loudon, who was at that time campaigning there, would consent to meet him on a public platform and debate the question of the capital stock assessment as reduced by the Loudon-appointed tax commission of the following corporations: the Pullman Company, the Chicago Streetcar Lines, and the People's Gaslight and Coke Company of Chicago. Loudon refused to accept the challenge. Okay, we made it to the bottom of page 40, and we'll pick up with page 41 when we begin again.